When I started in real estate in 2016, when you got to West Newport, which is anything west of York Street, it was pretty funky. You could buy houses for 10 grand. Now you can't buy them for 80 grand. The same house, full rehab, the whole needs everything.
Welcome to the Cincinnati Real Estate Investing Show. I'm your host, Slocum Reed, joined by our co-host, Ian Cruz, and our guest this week, Garth Kukla. Garth has been a personal friend of mine for a decade. He is now early retired, thanks in large part to his real estate investing, but also to his investing savvy outside of real estate. He was a full-time wholesaler from roughly 2016 to 2024, and he has profound levels of insight, especially in Northern Kentucky, where the vast majority of his wholesaling happened, and those neighborhoods that he knows best from living there, studying them, and then transacting in them hundreds of times. So Garth, tell us your Cincinnati story. You grew up in Cincinnati, didn't you?
I say that I did
Cincinnati.
because I was born in Chicago, but I've lived more than 3/4 of my life here. So starting about 10 years ago, I started saying I'm from here. And most of that has been in Northern Kentucky.
Gotcha. You did go to Walnut Hills High School though, right? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes. I briefly lived in Ohio, 2 different stints. We moved to Mount Washington so my brother could get in-state tuition at UC, and I graduated from Walnut. And then in college, I lived right by the police station on Ezra Charles, 1403 Central Parkway for a couple of years.
There are 2 public high schools in Ohio that are perennially in the top 50 public high schools in the country. It's Walnut Hills, and I believe the other one's Cleveland Heights High School. And so locally, graduating from Walnut Hills means something. It means something more than just locally. But yeah, Garth, tell us what got you into wholesaling, and then we'll dive deep into it.
What got me into wholesaling was taking a deep dive way back when Brandon Turner was doing Bigger Pockets and his podcast. I think the first podcast I listened to was podcast number 10. So yeah, it was quite a few years
ago. All they did was trash Detroit.
Pretty much.
Like every other conversation was just about how bad Detroit is. And at the time that might have been true, but it's come roaring back since then. Sorry, go ahead, Garth.
Yeah, no worries. And I listened to them talk about buy and hold, fix and flip, and wholesaling appealed to me because when I started in real estate, I had a 19-year background in selling. And so it appealed to me as something that I could physically do, while from a monetary standpoint, something that I could accomplish because I was having to fund everything myself. When I started, I quit my full-time job and I had 1 year of money to pay all my bills and fund my company. And I just got after it. But prior to me quitting, I spent several years getting ready with scripts and contracts and LLCs. And a lot of people that talked to me at the very beginning didn't believe that I just started because I sounded decent. I wouldn't say experienced, but decent. And that's how it started.
Most of the time we define wholesaling as direct-to-seller sales, where you get to the seller off market and then get their property under contract and either assign your interest as the purchaser in the contract for a fee, or you buy it and immediately turn it around and sell it before doing anything to improve the property. Direct to seller, in your case, may be a bit of a misnomer. I know most of your deals came from referrals, didn't they? Or am I thinking of this incorrectly?
No, you're partially correct. At the beginning, I did the standard bandit signs, postcards, telemarketing, phone calls. What was that 3-line dialer where you dial 3 numbers at the same time?
Mojo.
I did all that for about 3 years, every year growing my business, every year taking 95% of the profits and putting them back into more marketing, more this, more that, building the team. Around 2019, 2020, is when I literally switched off, transitioned from that to starting to get referrals. And then I think by 21 was probably when I stopped doing any marketing except for SEO. And it was 100% referral base. But that didn't mean that I wasn't talking to a lot of the sellers still. It just meant that I was getting brought into the deal by somebody else that didn't know how to close it because it was maybe a Northern Kentucky deal. I think, Slocum, you and I had a couple where it was one of your investors had somebody in Newport, didn't know Newport. You brought me in. We did the deal together.
Yeah. Speaking broadly, and to some degree, you've already answered the question because you built the reputation for yourself that you could get these kinds of deals done. And so other people were bringing them to you. And I remember you paying a really generous referral fee and that being part of how you were able to receive so many referrals, but also just your ability to execute. What would you say were the key factors to your success in wholesaling when you were doing it full time?
It started with, I never got a house under contract that I couldn't move. So literally, I only canceled one contract, but then 3 years later, I came back to that lady and I was able to move her house. I ended up physically buying it at the time. So I don't know if that counts as a canceled contract.
3 years, yeah, that counts as a cancel contract.
But I
3
ended up
years
buying
later
it
is
and
a
selling.
different.
I think when I watched another podcast, our friend Joe, who talked about superpowers, and I started focusing on my superpowers, which were closing real estate transactions. Get me in front of a motivated seller and I'll leave with a contract, period. I won't not leave with one if one is available. And then networking. And then I just combined those two things to honestly magnify my access to off-market deals. And then 2019 and 2020 is when my team started going away for reasons not because of me. And then the light bulb went off that my superpower was not to build a team. And so as soon as I shrunk my team, I realized that I was making more money, if that makes sense. So I was focused on the numbers and profitability and delayed gratification. I close a huge deal, but I grind the next day, if that answers the question.
It does. Superpowers begin with get me in front of a motivated seller. How is it that you focused on getting in front of motivated sellers? And how is it that you were checking for motivation to make sure that you were focusing your time and efforts on people who actually wanted to sell?
So
Let me just clarify real quick that I know personally in all of the direct to seller lead gen that I've done, most of my feelings of burnout for most people come from spending too much time and effort dealing with the people who aren't actually interested in moving their real estate right now. Some of the best deals that I ever did came from my own off-market lead gen efforts, but those were the people who you get on the phone with them the first time and you just know that they're ready and they have a price, they have a number in mind, they're reasonable. And so I know you had a really good way of focusing your time getting to figuring out their motivation quickly so that you were only ever bothering with the people who actually would transact and give you the opportunity to get them out of their situation and you make money. Sorry, go ahead and continue, Garth.
Yeah, no worries. So the magic question is, how long have you been thinking about selling your house? And the only two answers that I cared about are right now or sometime in the future. And every other time you would get off the phone. Because if I'm talking to somebody who called me back because I sent them a postcard and their answer was, I'm talking to you because I'm thinking about selling my house. I already got an offer. If you can offer it more, that's great. I've never bought a house from somebody like that. I'm just wondering, are you guys legitimate? Any other answer besides those two answers? So I was pretty strict on when I talked to somebody, I asked them some questions. And to your point, when we were talking offline, the actual quote that I remember telling you, slightly modified, was when I ask a seller, how much do you want for your house? And when they don't answer, I say, I've never bought a house from somebody that didn't tell me what price it is. And then I would go down the grocery store example and say, when you go to Kroger and you buy a gallon of milk, the cashier doesn't say, how much do you want to pay for this? And it stops them and it makes them think a little bit. And then you follow that up with just some honesty and some integrity. And like I said, a lot of times you can just get the deal done. I think one of my favorite things to do, especially when I'm belly to belly with a seller, was to look them in the eye and say, you will make more money if you sell through a realtor. And then I don't say another word until they react to that statement. And it breaks down all the, I'm going to try to steal your house. Is this person credible? Does this person know what he's doing? All those kinds of sort of things. And it's the old saying, you want somebody chasing you. It's like the dog. If you want to catch a dog, you don't chase the dog, you get the dog to chase you. And that's kind of one of the ways from a verbal standpoint, you can get a seller to think differently by literally trying to talk them out of selling houses to you. You will buy more houses.
And focus your time on the people who are most genuinely interested in selling off market.
Yep.
For what are the most common motivations for selling to you instead of listing with a realtor and getting more money, Garth?
I love hearing the words done or tired. So speed, right? There's speed, there's money, and there's convenience. And the seller gets to pick two, right? And when they pick speed and convenience, then they're calling a wholesaler and they're selling me their house. When they want a specific price, that's when they list. So it's a lot of times when I bought a house where I closed in 4 days because they were going to lose to, this was a Newport, they were going to lose to a tax sale. And they said, I'm going to get nothing. And I'm like, if you let me buy the house, I can give you $5,000 as long as the numbers work. And they ended up working and I ended up getting them $5,000 and I ended up doing a good deal. It could be an out of town member owning a house locally and it's full of stuff. It doesn't smell good. It's an older lady who's moving into a different home or a myriad of reasons. But again, it gets back to that convenience, making it easier. And a wholesaler will always make it easier. Now, again, it will be at a discount, but yeah.
I want to shift the conversation here to talk more specifically about what's going on in Northern Kentucky right now. I know you and I were on the phone a couple of weeks ago, and you were helping me understand the different pockets of Covington, because I found myself with a property in a part of Covington that is right in between the two better known areas. And what's this sliver, what's actually happening here. So I want to ask Ian, you may want to pull up a screen share of Google Maps so that we can just move around while we're looking at this. There are a lot of people, especially non-local investors, Garth, who just think of the Cincinnati metro area being in Ohio, and they're not familiar at all with Northern Kentucky. So let's give a broad overview of the main Northern Kentucky neighborhoods and what real estate investors should expect from them.
Well, the biggest city in Northern Kentucky is Covington, and that's the one that I was helping you with. And it's a very pockety neighborhood, city. Pocket.
Yeah, you pull it up on Google Maps, and it looks like a gerrymandered congressional district.
It's weird because below 275, it continues again.
Yeah.
So it's a very large city, believe it or not. But when I say Covington, so Latonia was bought by Covington. So for the longest time, I'm so old, I call Latonia still Latonia, not Covington. But Covington has some great neighborhoods. And then it has these pockets of really bad. 10th and Greenup, I think was the largest. It was a crime problem. I don't want to get into the details of it. And I lived 4 blocks away from 10th and Greenup. And it was glorious. I lived at 6th and Greenup, and it was beautiful because that 6th and Greenup is what they call the Licking Riverside area, where you have these 5, 6, 8,000 square foot mansions chopped up into apartments, but they're still glorious. And then 6 blocks away, you can have projects. So I think for me, getting to your question of like success, one of the things that I focused on Northern Kentucky, because then the more I did, the more I learned, the better I could assess a deal. Like what I told you, sometimes areas don't change. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they're slow. Sometimes you shouldn't expect anything nonetheless. But Covington is an interesting place because there's a lot of development, but then there's a lot of places where it's the same. Where I live in Newport, it's exploded all to the upside.
Let's stick with Covington for now, just because it is so big and there's so much going on.
Yes.
First of all, is it fair to say that Covington, close to the river, plays very differently than the rest of Covington does?
Yes and no. Latonia I've sold a lot of houses in Latonia, which is considered Covington now, and it's a nice neighborhood. I've never really thought about the river as an effect. I looked at more the neighborhoods, if that means anything.
That makes sense. There's a part of Covington that, at least for a while, had short-term rental appeal. We've had Iwei Chang on the podcast to tell us about the different ways that short-term rentals and Airbnb have been regulated in Covington.
Yep.
But the 2 pockets closest to the river that act in special ways, there are 2 things I'd like to highlight. The first one is Mainstrasse Village.
Yes.
I want you to give a more general explanation of what Mainstrasse is, but what I really want to ask is, how far does the Mainstrasse effect go on the real estate desirability, values, rent rates, etc., off of that main strip? Because I feel like there are definitely areas where they want to claim that they're in Mainstrasse Village, but they really aren't. And I don't know those boundaries well enough.
Yeah, so the main, obviously it goes off of Main Street, but then it goes all the way over to Philadelphia. And I think Philadelphia is where it stops. And then on the other side, so is that the east side of Mainstrasse? There's not a north-south delineation per se. Pike Street provides that, but Pike Street is a northeast, southwest angling street. I used to live on Pike Street, and I used to live on Philadelphia. So I would say when you talk Mainstrasse, it's going to start at 5th Street from the north, and most of it is going to stop at 9th Street, because once you get south of 9th Street, it's gotten a lot nicer, and it's technically still Mainstrasse near. But as a person that I actually technically lived at 839 Perry Street, which is like literally right around where your cursor is. So I walked that area all the time. I never considered below 9th Street Mainstrasse. Below 9th Street all the way to Martin Luther King, which is 12th Street, has gentrified so much that I almost want to include that into the Mainstrasse area, because it feels good's not the right word. What is the area where the clock is in OTR? There's that specific, it's a neighborhood.
Pendleton, which is a separate neighborhood, but has felt a lot of the redevelopment of OTR.
And that's the same thing. That would be a great analogy of that. right? If you're wanting Mainstrasse, it's 5th Street to 9th Street, and you go to Philadelphia, and then on the other side, like I said, there's no parallel boundary, a north-south that is. But your Mainstrasse is not 5 blocks east of Main Street. Like if you get to Madison, that's its own neighborhood.
And there's some really cool stuff happening right there around Madison Avenue, but it's a different thing.
Yeah, and I helped a good friend of mine flip a house on Crescent, which is on the other side of the highway, and the seller was like, I'm in Mainstrasse, so this property must be valuable. Yeah, so and like 75 is a clear boundary for the neighborhood.
Time for a quick look at what's making news in Cincinnati real estate.
There's more than $200 million of new development moving across greater Cincinnati right now. This is your Queen City Pulse. Let's start in Hyde Park, where the new Hyde Park Square plan goes to Neighborhood Council. PLK Communities and their partners won 116 new apartments, 45 renovated units, and about 20,000 square feet of retail at Edwards and Erie. Here's the thing. It's a do-over. The council killed the $150 million version last year for being too tall, so now it steps back to about 75 feet, and the hotel and pool are gone. It still has to clear the Planning Commission and City. Council. Over in Kenwood, the port is putting up $55 million in bonds to help fund the next phase of Aspired Kenwood, a $67 million project. You get 127 apartments plus office and retail right next to Kenwood Towns. Financing should close in July. Down in Newport, Urban Sites wants to break ground in November. 400 months. It's a $36 million project. 124 market rate apartments on the old World Peace Bell site, backed by city bonds and a 30-year tax break. And here's a fun one. Hillman just broke ground on a $100 million distribution center at the old Forest Fair. That dead mall is turning into more than 700,000 square feet of logistics, and they're leaving 3 leased buildings in Forest Park, Springfield Township, and Hemel. So watch for those spaces opening. And for the builders, Covington is taking proposals on 28 vacant city-owned lots in Peaselburg and the West Side for new houses. West Side proposals are due July 4th, Peaselburg by August 25th.
That's your Queen City Pulse. Back to the show.
We're going to be recording a special episode of the Cincy REI show here soon with guests who get to decide what we talk about, any topic they want within Cincy REI, and ask us any questions that we'll answer with full transparency. If you want to be one of those guests, it's really simple. Go to your favorite social media platform between Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and send out a post that says you listen to the show, you like it, share that you're a fan of the podcast, tell your people that they should listen to it as well. Put a link to the podcast in your post and tag us in it, the Cincy REI show account on your preferred platform. And when we see that, we'll DM you an invite to find a time to schedule this recording with us. We'd love to have you. Hope to see you there. Garth, real quick before we move on, 'cause there's one more thing in Covington I want to highlight here.
Yeah.
What is the appeal of Mainstrasse? Why is it that I would bring that up? Why is it that it's known within Northern Kentucky, Greater Cincinnati?
Bars and restaurants and proximity to downtown. So if you own an Airbnb, you can sell it to people that want to go stay in downtown, but they don't want to deal with the parking and the traffic and everything else. A good friend of mine had an Airbnb on Route 8 with a view of downtown, and he did very well for many years. So it's kind of like a mini Mount Adams, where there's just lots of bars, lots of restaurants, and some fantastic eateries. Like some of my favorite restaurants are literally on Main Street.
Garth, if you could
For the
give
record,
a pin.
Mainstrasse not as nice as Mount Adams. That's a Garth opinion, not a Cincy REI show opinion. So direct all of your comments at Garth.
Yes, my opinion. What were you going to say, Ian?
Garth, if you could put a pin in some of the popular restaurants, just so I know like where generally the action is when you talk about restaurants or bars.
So
6th and Main.
And then just north of 6th Street, Main, there's Bouquet, there's Otto's, Lisa's. It's a new steakhouse. Haven't been, but heard good things. And right next to Otto's is Bouquet. And that's probably one of my favorite restaurants in all of Cincinnati. Top 5.
Slogan, we spent a lot of time at Dowdit Bar too.
Yeah. And Zazu is great. The English pub on the corner there, right next to your icon, Cock and Bull. It smells like a pub, but it's great fish and chips. And there's great burgers. There's great pizza. There's even like a bourbon lounge above the pizza joint right next to Cock and Bull. So there's all kinds. You can literally just park your car and just walk around and have lots of choices, like similar to OTR, but just in a smaller capacity. Yeah, but Covington's always been that way a little bit. There's a a funny expression. There's a t-shirt that says, put on your t-shirt, Covington. But that would be the 6th and Main if you wanted to start with some great restaurants.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I've had really good pizza down there too. There's another thing about Covington, and I will say it reminds me a lot of Spooky Nook in the city of Hamilton, and the way everyone just wanted us to talk about Spooky Nook, and that was the only thing that mattered. And it may just be hype, but it completely revolutionized real estate and real estate investing in the city of Hamilton, especially within a mile or two of Spooky Nook. You have the Ovation development in Covington. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is? Let's move on to Newport then. Tell us a little bit about an Ovation and
Ovation.
Yeah.
It's right by the Megacorp. It's right on the river, and it's right on the bend of the river between the Licking Ovation Parkway. So there's condos, there's apartments, and there's just going to be more buildings. So about right around the '08 crash, the guy that owns Circle Port, Bill Butler, bought up all that part of Newport. That used to be project housing. If you want to see what this all used to be, there's still a couple projects. If you're going over the 4th Street Bridge, which is closed now, and you look to your left, so that would be south, there's still a couple, 2 or 3 buildings remain that used to cover this whole area. Bill Butler bought them all up, knocked them down, and then the '08 crash stopped things. And then he started cranking it up about 5, 6, 7 years ago, because the views are amazing. The access is amazing. The development is incredible. They just put in a new Kroger at 7th and York. So we have the Newport Pavilion Kroger, we have the Bellevue Kroger, and we have this new Kroger, all within a half a mile of each other, which almost seems a little too much, but I feel like I'm not going to tell Kroger where to put their places. I think they know what they're doing, but that speaks to the development.
I was just going to say, I think Kroger has figured out that there's a different type of demand for an urban walkable grocery store.
Yep.
Because the one on Central Parkway at the border of OTR and the business district downtown Cincinnati it's doing great business, but also they have a food hall on the 2nd floor.
Yep.
Why would you have a food hall in a grocery store in the burbs? It's just a totally different experience. Limited menu, but a kind of quirky urban, not menu, limited selection in the grocery store, because it's a smaller footprint, but they have the kinds of things that the people who want to live close to there have. And so I think they've just figured out that there are people who want the convenience of the large grocery store, and they want to be able to walk to it, and they're going to go somewhere else if they'd have to drive to the pavilion.
I went to the one on 7th and York, and it's really nice. But to pull back to the Ovation thing, like I said, I think once it's complete, I believe it will be having some office towers, some restaurants. The really nice condos go for a couple million, and they're spectacular. And then apparently, just if you go on the Licking River into south in the map a little bit, they just got approved for 300 or so apartments. When you would hear me say, Slocum, that my town is exploding, it literally is. When I started in real estate in 2016, when you got to West Newport, which is anything west of York Street, it was pretty funky. You could buy houses for 10 grand. Now you can't buy them for 80 grand. The same house. Full rehab, the whole needs everything. So it's kind of, and I attribute a lot of that to Ovation, but then it's also just this redevelopment of everything starting in the east side and then just pushing west.
Yeah. So how far, I've heard a lot of people say, who are serious real estate investors, specialize in Northern Kentucky, say buy anything close to Ovation that you can because it's all going to shoot up in value. How far from Ovation is the Ovation effect happening, or in your opinion, going to happen?
I've honestly never thought of it that way. So this is just going to be my opinion. Send comments to me. I feel like everything has just been blowing up. Like I said, there used to be Hodge was a bad street. Katuro was a bad street. Lindsay was a bad street. I'm not saying these are great streets, but every one of them has been different. Like Hodge, if you pull up Zillow for sale, there's a house on Hodge selling for $300,000. In 2012, I bought my house for less than that. And I live on one of the best streets in Newport. Now, again, it was a couple years ago. Yet this is a tiny little nothing house, and the prices are crazy. I never thought about the proximity to Ovation. I thought about Ovation is going on in Newport, so I'm going to invest in Newport. So that 1019, I wholesaled that house. Orchard. Yeah, 1019, I wholesaled that. During COVID. That's funny. That 187, that one's been on the market for a while. So yeah, so does that answer your question? The fact that Ovation is going on in Newport caused all of Newport to blow up. Now, obviously, if you go way south on Monmouth Street and you butt up to Gate, it feels a little different.
The boundary there is, it's on the map right now for those of you who are watching. It's like the railroad tracks, and then right after the railroad tracks, you start going literally geographically uphill. Is that really where the border is? I mean,
No,
you go up the hill, you've got some newer development, newer as in the last 30, 40 years, because in an area this close to downtown, that's new. But I would say that Newport definitely changes when you cross the tracks, doesn't it?
Yes and no. 10 years ago, anything on 13th Street you could have picked up for pennies on the dollar. 2 years ago, 13th Street hosted Home-A-Rama with $1 million houses because developers bought them all up, knocked them all down, and then put up these $1 million, $1.2 million houses, whatever. 14th Street's a great shot. 15th Street. 17th Street. This is all Newport. Beale Street is probably one of the highest rent streets because it's just stunning. Yeah, right there. If you did a street view, you can understand what I'm talking about. It's a shorter street, so there's not going to be as many per se, but it's not a border because it still goes much south than that. It's like a little like Covington where there's some pockets. So once you get past 9th Street to 12th Street in Newport, a little lesser. Yeah, see these houses, the nicer houses on your left, those are going to have views. That's why they're nicer.
The ones on the north or downhill side are going to have the views, and that's why they look so much bigger and newer and nicer than the ones on the non-view side of the river. Yeah.
And literally, once you get to 13th, that used to be a slum area, and then they just knocked a lot of that stuff down. And then a lot of the other stuff just got redeveloped. There used to be a school there that's now high-end condos. That there's not to say that there's still some houses that are more humble, as I would like to kindly say. But literally, you could still go south. So the border, the railroad tracks are not the border. The railroad tracks are a delineation between 12th Street is a little funky. It's still really good because there's no such thing as a bad spot in Newport. But then once you get to Broadway and 13th, it goes crazy again with $1 million houses.
I want to zoom back a little bit because I know what my next question is. When I've had these conversations with you and other Northern Kentucky investors over the years, let me first say that for those of you who are not listening, the Ohio River is what separates Ohio from Kentucky, Cincinnati from Northern Kentucky. On the Northern Kentucky side, you have, speaking specifically around the riverfront, you have several smaller cities that make up the same riverfront as downtown Cincinnati into the West End and the East End. Actually feeding into the Ohio is from the south of Kentucky, the Licking River, which Garth has referenced a couple times. That's an assumption that I would have made over the last 10 years and still make to some degree. So to the east, you've got Bellevue and Dayton, the next two towns over from Newport. And then to the west, next town over from Covington is Ludlow. Does it really work that way that as Covington, these parts of Covington and Newport get really hot, the people who are priced out are just moving down or upriver to Bellevue, Dayton, Ludlow? What's happening in those neighborhoods?
Yes, Bromley is the edge of that. Ludlow is blown up a little bit. There's some cool stuff down there. I've done some deals there. Bellevue was probably the first place to explode, and a lot of beautiful houses, a lot of the similar attributes to Newport with only one difference, and that is the Fairfield Avenue access point. At 5 o'clock any given day, it's not going to be fun to be on Fairfield Avenue because there'll be just a lot of people going in. And that's pretty much, if you're coming to Cincinnati, you're going to go that way. So it's one way in, one way out. That, and then the river itself is not part of the flood wall per se. So if you scoot east on Fairfield Avenue a little bit more, and then here, stop right there. So if you look at Ward and Foote, and you go to the river and you count the first 15 houses, those are all going to be in the flood zone. So it's beautiful. Yeah, like all these houses, they're all in the flood zone. What does that mean? That means in 1997, they had water in their basement when it flooded. That means that when you buy a house there, you have to pay flood insurance with your mortgage. It's cool. And in 2016, it was difficult to sell houses in the flood zone. In 2026, it's easy because it's a cheaper way to get into an area close to Cincinnati. Beautiful streets, cool homes.
And 1997 was 10 more years ago.
Yeah, I'm saying the 97 flood came up to almost Fairfield Avenue. So it covered a lot of houses. But there's a website that I lived on that tells you where the floodplain is. And half of these streets below Fairfield Avenue were in the floodplain. Just something to know about. But I love Bellevue. And then Dayton got a little weird. 10, 12, 15 years ago, this major project was supposed to go in called the Manhattan project. They bought the marina, and they were
That's an
and then all
ominous name.
Yeah, man, I'm trying to think of what exactly it's called now. It's the Riverside Marina. There's a whole bunch of stuff down there, and it was supposed to 10, 15 years ago blow up all of Dayton. So everybody thought they were going to be millionaires, and they overpriced everything, and then it never happened. It's happening now, and so if you take a boat ride, you can see some beautiful mansions right on the river in Dayton. So if you did a satellite view, you could probably see some of these mansions, or at least the development, right? But this is outside the flood wall. So they had to be up high. You're close to Cincinnati. I say close because if you're there and you want to get to Cincinnati, it's going to be probably 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of development. So it's exploded a little bit. And it's finally happened where they started selling houses, selling apartments. I don't know if that answers that question. I apologize. I can't answer as much on the Ludlow Bromley side because I didn't do as much there. My first real estate wholesale deal was 411 Taylor in Bellevue.
Thanks for listening to this episode. My company, Three Little Pigs, and I, we're expert operators at real estate investing in Greater Cincinnati, and we created this podcast to add value to you and to anyone who wants to listen to content like this. You can also find us all over social media if that's your preference. If you're looking to engage an expert operator for your investments in the Greater Cincinnati area, please reach out to us. Our platform includes property management by me through Keller Williams Seven Hills Realty. We're also general contractors. We have in-house maintenance and in-house HVAC, and we share the entire platform with the private equity opportunities that we create. We also take on third-party clients to operate their investments as well. The property management, the general contracting, in-house maintenance and HVAC, and we can also do a lot of the residential sales. So if you're an active or passive investor looking to partner with an expert Cincinnati operator, please reach out to us. You can find our contact info in the bio. Looking on the map, when you get into these, talking about Bellevue and Dayton, are there any particular streets, railroad tracks, or things that create borders that our listeners should be aware of when they're looking in those neighborhoods? You need to be on this side of the street to get X, and on this side of the street.
What cities are we asking again? What's it? Bellevue and Dayton. So the delineation between Bellevue and Dayton, I believe, is right around Foot or Vine. That would be one. And then, farther east, keep going on Fairfield.
That's Foot Avenue, but Vine Street is, right there.
Yeah, right here. Here's Vine. So Ward is right on the border, Ward and Foot, and then right across that is Bellevue, is Dayton. So I think that would be one border. Honestly, when you're talking about Bellevue and Dayton, treat Fairfield Avenue kind of like the Mainstrasse. So its proximity to Fairfield Avenue is a good thing. And then if you go south off of Fairfield Avenue, you'll start getting into some more hills. Obviously you can see that the roads get funky in their shape. That's because of geography. And especially if you go a little more east, right? Yeah, like right there. Yeah. Like you could tell. And then Fort Thomas butts up to Dayton, right? So some of this is Fort Thomas, but some of this is also really funky hills, Cape Cod's on hills with foundation issues.
And there are so many neighborhoods. I don't want to give the impression that all of Northern Kentucky is by the river and this has been comprehensive, because it hasn't. But I know that Garth has lived a lot of his life in Covington and Newport and done a lot of his investing in these neighborhoods around the river. And so that's where I wanted to hone in. We are coming up on time now. I want to ask you, Garth, our last question. I'm going to modify it a little bit here. I want to know your Northern Kentucky hidden gems. This is not necessarily about real estate investing, but what are the spots in Northern Kentucky that a lot of people from Greater Cincinnati and maybe even Northern Kentucky haven't heard of that you think they should experience, and the places that nobody from outside of Greater Cincinnati has ever heard of?
From a living perspective, a restaurant and bar perspective, or what? Or everything?
You decide. I'd love to hear where you think the best burger in Northern Kentucky is. I've probably been there. I think you and I may have gone there together, wherever it is. I've got a long list, but yeah, just some of the things that people should experience in Northern Kentucky that they probably haven't heard of before.
Wow. As far as if you're a Dustin Hoffman fan, at the corner of 6th and Washington in Newport is Pompilio's, where they drop the toothpicks. So you can literally sit in the area where he dropped the toothpicks, and it's pretty cool. And it's a neat place.
Oh, what's the name of that movie? I remember the scene, but Rain Man, yeah.
Yeah. I would say it's not a hidden gem, but the park in Covington right next to the suspension bridge. So if my wife and I would be on our bikes and it's a beautiful day. Yeah, right there. There's that Riverside Drive, the George Rogers Clark Park. And right along that drive, there's park benches. So get a sandwich and a beverage, a bottle of water, and have a lunch right there on the river. It's pretty awesome with a tremendous view of downtown and the suspension bridge. Yeah, there's literally benches there, and it's awesome. It's incredible. This is something that I've learned to evaluate. You have to learn to be a tourist in your own town, right? And then I'll close with, for me, the reason why I moved to Covington when I was 18 and I still live in Northern Kentucky and I'm 54. And I would say that 95% of the time was spent in Northern Kentucky is because A, there's a lot of stuff to do, but B, if I want to get to Findlay Market, I'm parking in 10 minutes. If I want to go play poker at the casino, I'm parking in 8 minutes. It's proximity to most things at OTR. It's phenomenal. So it's a convenience factor. So to your point about draw to the river and everything, there is a component where if somebody wants to be centrally located and live in a very walkable, vibrant community, I'm biased for Newport, but Covington has come a long way. And there's the Licking Riverside where that park is. That's an extraordinary neighborhood. If you want to see 10,000 square foot, $3 million mansions, just walk the streets of Licking Riverside. It's spectacular.
Homes that were built 150 to 120 years ago.
Yes. And some of them are apartments, but most of them are just spectacular single families that are still maintained that way, which is great, unless you're in Mount Adams. But even with Mount Adams, you're on the side.
The George Rogers Clark Park. I grew up in Springfield, Ohio, so I didn't know there was one of those down here. We have one in Springfield. But yeah, no, that's a great one. I'll have to go check that out sometime. Garth, appreciate you being here. Thank you very much. Listeners, thank you as well for tuning in. If you gained value from this episode, please do subscribe to our show and share it with a friend who you know we can add value to through our content that's focused on investing in real estate in Greater Cincinnati. Leave us a 5-star review, and we will see you next week. Quick disclaimer, the opinions expressed on this podcast are provided for informational purposes only. This is not an offer to buy or sell any securities, to make or consider any investment or course of action, and it is not an offer of agency from Slocum Reed or Keller Williams, Seven Hills Realty.